Okay, so we're recording now. So today we are going to look at our team's approach to combating white supremacy manifestations within a research context. So let's dive right on in. We want to acknowledge that although this is a virtual presentation and we're all in different physical locations, we do gather for this webinar from different places, but all on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples, past and present. So we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. And this calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the lands we inhabit and the practices in which we engage. So now, a couple of learning agreements to sort of set the stage before we get started. This webinar is not open to discussions that challenge or question the existence of racism, injustice, and inequity. This webinar is also not a place to question the validity of learning about race, racism, equity, or white supremacy. We encourage everyone to treat each other with respect, honesty, appreciation, and grace whenever possible, as we will be in different places along our learning paths. Recognize that we are all imperfect humans and try to work to be comfortable with the discomfort. And just a logistical point here, feel free to chat your questions as they come to you throughout the presentation, and we're going to address them all at the end. And if you have any concerns about a discussion during this webinar, please contact Molly at this email listed here. Great. So thanks again for choosing to share your time with us today. We are all members of the Food, Fitness, and Opportunity Research Collaborative, or FFORC for short. And we are seated at the Center for Health Promotion and Disease Prevention, which is a CDC Prevention Research Center with strong ties to the Gillings School of Global Public Health at UNC. So pictured here is not our entire team, but this is the group of us you'll be hearing from today. So this image shows some of the places in the state where we've been working for a number of years centered around our SNAP Ed funding. We also have other projects placed in different locations in the state and across the country. Our research and programming at FFORC centers on food access, physical activity, child hunger and nutrition, the impact of a living wage on health and wellness, and college student food and financial insecurity. And we ground our approach in community engaged and participatory research methodologies. We're always seeking to put as much power and resources into the hands of our community partners as we can. And this map is a good illustration of some of the community partners we have across the state. So for many years now, our team members have been actively engaged in anti-racism education to inform our work and ways of engagement. And that has taken many shapes, including all team members attending Racial Equity Institute trainings, our group working internally with equity coaches who have helped our team to evaluate how we might personally or as a professional unit be inadvertently perpetuating racist culture, and also starting a monthly conversation at our center in which we dig into aspects of equity and racism, to name a few. And so now I'll turn it over to Reverend Kearney for the next few slides. Take it away.
Good afternoon. It's good being here. As we form an anti-racist lens, we're trying to practice what we learn in the communities we've worked in for several years. And one thing we're trying to do is balance power and building relationship. So we've had community roundtables and looking at the way we disseminate our information back to our community partners. We've created focus groups to talk about discrimination. And after deciding to curtail work with farmers market, so there were a couple in Warren County we were working with local farmers market, and we changed our focus to talk about discrimination and be more anti-racist. And what excites me too is we do racial equity field trips. Next. So community forums in spring of 2016, we hosted community forums in 5 of the 6 counties we worked in. And the goals were to bring together all our partners and stakeholders to foster new connections. We identified community assets and opportunities for collaboration for the food system. And our partners included in those community garden projects, the corporate extension, school systems, faith communities, among many others. And so it was an awesome opportunity to see who was already providing services within the community and get their input about what the community assets and challenges might be. Next. Our focus group, after, again, working in our communities and seeing that sometimes they were a little pushback from our community partners, we realized maybe we weren't really hearing their real voices. And so we set up focus groups and in Warren County and with people of color, you know, relative access to food and retail versus farmers markets. So as we did our focus group, we really heard the really need of the voice of the community, as opposed to us suggesting and bringing in our projects. We could really tailor our projects to align with what the voice of the community was. So, for example, in Lenore County, farmers market was adjacent to a Confederate memorial and was perceived to include a slave ship. So sometimes when we're calling our partners to different places or locations for our counties, we didn't know the histories. And so beginning to interact through focus group, we learned the histories of spaces and places. And so we want to perpetuate racism, but we could actually begin to be more anti-racist in our approach. So we engage people of color for a 90-minute conversation around their food experiences and experiences of racial discrimination. And to really get our partners to talk about racial discrimination, it took really building relationships of trust where they felt comfortable talking about race. Next slide, please. Our field trips were very intentional to take our research teams to historically African-American communities across the state, even before we did projects, to really begin to hear their voices and their stories and see the strengths and assets of our partners. So it was an awesome experience to begin to go and introduce the projects we desired to do. Get voices of our community leaders. And some of the locations we went to were the Stagfield Plantation in Durham County, Franklinton Center at Bricks. We also went to Tillery, Greensboro, and Warren County was also a place we went. So this is a wonderful opportunity to meet awesome people across the state and really engage the community in our conversation and learn more about the communities we want to serve. Next slide, please. So I'll give it to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Reverend Kearney. So over the past couple of years, we've been embracing Tema Okun's definitions of white supremacy manifestations as a good way to examine our work, both internally and externally, and try to identify antidotes to standard ways of operating that would allow for more mindful and holistic approaches to engagement. And we'll have a link for you to her website toward the end of the presentation. I'll also drop it in the chat. It's a really useful tool and provides an excellent way to dig into established modes of being, which validate certain norms, often without examining why or what is missed by not giving space to other ways being good in their own right. And this valuation of certain ways above all others can be especially prevalent within academia. Tema Okun details 14 characteristics of white supremacy culture, which are just that, part of the dominant culture. And they include things like the belief in one right way of doing things, sense of urgency, quantity over quality, and worship of the written word. We want to be clear, and this will likely surface throughout the presentation, that racist norms and white supremacy manifestations are systemic realities that we are all subject to. If you've been to any REI trainings, you've heard them say that if we're fish, then racism is the water in which we all swim. And it's important to always try to remember that. Real change comes from seeing and challenging the systems that we're all a part of. I also want to say that members of our team, who you'll hear from today, are not experts. We are practitioners in that we are constantly practicing how to be anti-racist to improve our approach and impact. It's also worth noting that this collection of characteristics is just one tool and not the tool for examining white supremacy culture, which is something that Tema Okun says herself. To quote, One of the challenges we face as we work together is that building justice is complex and nuanced, while white supremacy culture likes to pretend we can reduce everything to a simple either or. So we are called to navigate the complexity of our conditioning without losing sight of the inherent humanity in each of us. We're going to look at a handful of the manifestations she describes and detail how our approach is seeking to counter the typical narrative on how things should or can be done. And with that, I will turn it over to Judith.
Thank you, Rachel. And I will start off talking with the first manifestation, which is only one right way. And this one is somewhat related to perfectionism. This is a thought that things should be done a certain way, or that there's only one right way to do things. Our team has had the opportunity to work and partner with different communities and organizations across North Carolina. And some of our relationships with these communities have been for a little over 5 years, some a bit more, some less. And each new year has brought new knowledge and new opportunities for us and our partners. Every community is different. And even though our relationships with these communities have been in existence for many years, it doesn't mean that we know the right way to engage or partner with them, or that we have adopted to the right way, but rather we are often invited to acknowledge value in their people, in their communities, in their cultures, their beliefs, their ideas, and interests. And these values could be all different for every community and or person. Next slide, please. Something that we often ask ourselves is how and who is deciding which is the right way? And if it's not done the right way, then are we making assumptions about someone else being wrong? In this case, it could be the communities that we're working with, or even someone from our team, and not necessarily those defining the one right way. Hiring people with lived experience in your work could be an antidote for this characteristic. Thinking about creating an inclusive environment to plan, design, implement, and evaluate your work could provide many different innovative approaches that will meet the needs of the community, because you're hiring people that have personal knowledge about their community and not representations constructed by other people. As a staff member and community member, I've had the opportunity to see firsthand how my relationships and connections have positively impacted our community and created meaningful and trustful relationships that have resulted in impactful work. Pay people from the community as contractors, as staff, or whatever they desire, to have a seat at the table and provide an opportunity to design, shape, or build projects in a different way and not the usual approach. There are many different ways to achieve the same goal. Our team has taken some time to reflect on how we are seeing this characteristic manifest itself within ourselves, our communities, and institutions. We got to allow some space to consider different ways of doing things, of co-creating, of making decisions, engaging, and being open to taking different paths. The new path could be a learning opportunity. We will be acknowledging that the process is not always easy, and there could be some challenges along the way, some big, some small, but we are learning from each of the challenges, and we are open to trying new things and opportunities. Next slide, please. The next manifestation that I'll be covering is progress is more. And this one is also could be called as quantity over quality. And when I think about a project and the usual measurable outcomes, it's oftentimes the number of people in attendance, the reach, the money we spent, or even the statistical significance. We are pressured to report on some of these outcomes. And this applies to some of the work and projects that we are currently doing, specifically to one of the projects that I've been working on, and that is Communities on the Move. This project started back in 2018, and it was a community-based intervention study. The aim was to assess the association between community cohesion and physical activity through wearing an accelerometer and tracking the participants' daily steps in 3 different communities. This study started off with a lot of motivation a lot of interest and participants, but over the course of the study, which lasted a few months, we had difficulty with retention and engagement. Our team regrouped and took some time to reflect on the community's priorities and ours. Soon, we understood and learned about some of the issues that these communities were dealing with and what we were not capturing with our study. We also decided to change our approach and focus on 2 different counties, Orange and Lenore. We planned and we wrote our scope of work for working with these communities in the 2 different counties. And well, that didn't move in any direction. And instead, we decided to take a step back again and refocus on only one community, Orange County. This community was located in Orange County. And next slide, please, Rachel. The type of engagement and relationship that we've had with this community has brought a deeper connection and interest in the project. For the past 2 years, we've been partnering with a local organization and a community from Orange County to make short-term changes to the built environment so that community members feel safer walking, biking, or simply just being outdoors and doing physical activity. A group of youth interns have led the community on the walking audit, a mapping my community activity, and this year they focused on learning about tactical urbanism. And they presented this idea to the community in a way that the community understood. The partners involved have taken the time to listen, understand, and reflect on the ideas and interests and concerns of the community. You'll see here these 3 pictures that were taken this past September on the day that the youth hosted a walkability event, where we had community members, we had partners, we had town and county elected officials and representatives. They came together to get a first glance of the issue and the community's concerns. The walking event brought awareness about having a healthy, beautiful community for all. And this weekend, the community and other partners have organized a neighborhood cleanup day. We learned that taking the time to listen, understand, build relationships, and connect with people interested in being part of the quality work will strengthen our partnerships and provide our team the opportunity to continually learn from each other. We're trying to refocus on doing work that is meaningful, intentional, and valued by the people living in the community and adapting to their needs. Some antidotes that could help with this manifestation could be having a living document and one that you can adapt to or make changes in case you feel like you need to take a step back or regroup, just like we did with this project. Ask yourself for the long-term impacts of the communities or spaces that you're working on, and support the people doing this work and partner with those that have similar mission and values as you do. We acknowledge that it's momentum that could be very hard to keep, so stay tuned. This is a work in progress, and it's a process that invites us to keep reflecting on the quality of our work. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I will pass it on to Tiki. She'll be talking a little bit more about another manifestation.
Thank you. So just to piggyback off of Judith's presentation about the progress is more, I'm going to talk about quantitative versus qualitative projects, because the project that I manage, Community Circles, is definitely more qualitative than quantitative in nature. In academia, and particularly within research settings, there is a high value placed on goals that can be measured quantitatively. The process that it takes to develop and cultivate these goals goes unvalued. Qualitative projects are often similar in scope and steeped in human relationships. They involve emotions and feelings, and therefore thought of as unmeasurable. Quantitative methods are often more objective and exploratory, while qualitative methods are often more subjective and conclusive. On Tema Okun's page, she has a tweet from MC Hammer. Yes, that MC Hammer can't touch this MC Hammer, in which he said, "You bore us. If science is a commitment to truth, shall we cite all the historical non-truths perpetuated by scientists? Of course not. It's not science versus philosophy. It's science plus philosophy. Elevate your thinking and consciousness. When you measure, include the measurer. Though perhaps not as eloquently stated as MC Hammer, I always say behind every piece of data lies a person. Next slide, please. Power hoarding can be defined as concentrating power into one or a few people. Essentially, it is inflating one's value by diminishing the value of others. This is often the case of those that live in rural communities. Community Circles was created with the idea that we would help our community partners develop an antidote to that white supremacy culture characteristic through inclusive dialogue and acknowledgement that power sharing should show up as a community value rather than individual possession. Like power hoarding, gatekeeping serves to keep an imbalance of power through the intentional decision-making around who receives what within a group. Next slide, please. In the first year of the Community Circles program, I encourage participants to see the value of their own community. Along the way, participants also began to see the value of their cultural identities, recognizing differences from the cultural norm as strengths rather than weaknesses. Now in year 4, we shared ideas based upon SNAP-Ed policy, systems, and environmental, also known as PSE, strategies and interventions. Using these as a guide, each Community Circles group has created and facilitates its own program. The Orange County group is comprised of a largely Spanish-speaking population and have decided to focus on nutrition, education, and physical activity for the adult participants as well as their children. In Warren County, the group is comprised of senior women, most of whom are African American. They too have decided to focus on nutrition education. Lastly, in Duplin County, the group is comprised of youth that attend a local community youth center. The focus there will be on providing more structured physical activity using some of the strategies and interventions found within the SNAP-Ed toolkit. I'd like to mention that the nutrition education for both the Orange County and Warren County groups will have a specific cultural focus. We recognize the fact that oftentimes nutrition education does very little to respect and include the cultural ties to our diets. 4 years of planning, listening, learning, and patience has brought us to this point. Rather than adhere to the sense of urgency that white supremacy often tries to dictate, we instead encouraged our partners to take the time they needed in their process to create change. We all know that change does not happen overnight. Adopting a sense of urgency only serves to create the exclusion of people, ideas, other modes of learning. It creates self-doubt, shame, perfectionism, and doesn't allow for the opportunity and the need to simply just breathe. I will now turn this over to Emil.
Thank you, Tiki. And I'm going to talk to folks a little bit about the worship of the written word manifestation that Tema Okun outlines in her manifestations of white supremacy. And in its most basic form, worship of the written word is the explicit valuing of textual texts and textual evidence as kind of the as everything. And we see that a lot in academic and research context. And certainly within our team, we try to work to counter that, both in our projects, in the planning stage of our projects, and in the evaluation parts. In doing this, we also work to worship and value people outside of the written word. So that includes our staff, as well as the communities we work with. So centering community interest and community work at the core of that, as well as culture, beliefs, and ideas. So making sure that in all of our work, we can properly and correctly represent any cultures, belief, and ideas that we do work with, and making sure that if it's something that, if it is not written and benefits the community in a unique and progressive way, then it's something that we can work with. And then interests go along with that too. And Tema Okun outlined the following as specific antidotes to this manifestation. And she says that antidotes can look like figuring out what actually needs to be written down and coming up with alternative ways to document what is happening, what is important, what can be continued to be engaged on. So like I said, we work to bring these values to our projects, their planning stages, and our internal and external evaluations. Next slide, please. Some of our projects that have done this, like Reverend Kearney mentioned, our community forums project, community circles like Tiki was just talking about. Those both represent some of the planning stages that we work in to incorporate to incorporate the antidote to worship of the written word. And then in our actual projects, one thing I've been working a lot with recently is a storytelling project in which we are working with communities around North Carolina to showcase and highlight community efforts and ongoing community work that is happening. And doing that in a way that is not written and can be shared with the community and benefit them outside of a research or academic context. Additionally, working to create significant relationships with the communities that we work with and within those. This allows for trust to be made and for a continuation of our work to happen. And in effect, creating long-term and beneficial solutions for communities. Additionally, in terms of the evaluations that we do, a lot of this comes from our community advisory board. So this is something we've had in place for about 2 years now, going on our third, and works to consistently and constantly allow for internal check-ins and hold us accountable to the values that we are talking about today. And then additionally, ripple effect mapping, which was a pretty unique project in which we worked with a number of different communities to talk about the ways that our projects within those communities impacted people, and pointing out what was the most poignant, and then what could have been improved, or really what was deemed unnecessary in the end. So with all this, I would like to show everyone in the audience what an example of one of these is. And so this is a video showcasing the Perry Hills community in Eflin, North Carolina. And there was an ongoing community effort to pave the roads, as you'll hear from some community members in this video. And we were thrilled to create a product out of this and create something that other people can see and understand, and really gain insight into how the community works and how ongoing community efforts work to create solutions within those.
Rachel, you probably have to unmute yourself.
Okay, yes. Let's try this again.
I moved to Perry Hill on Alpha Drive in 1975. Ever since I have been here, the road here had been dirt from this end to the beginning of the pavement there at the end of the road. So it's been a concern of mine ever since then.
And I live on Alpha Drive. Whenever I left home and wanted to go down Perry Road, I would have to swing out and go all the way over out of the other lane onto the dirt to miss the pothole. The road was filled with potholes, mud, and was just totally undrivable.
It was only for 3/4 of the year, it was almost impossible to access Chambly Road from here.
You had to drive down it like this, and it was a mud hole. It was like craters with big rocks.
It was basically the inconvenience of having the school buses and the emergency vehicles not being able to kind of get out of this area efficiently, right? Or in a timely manner, knowing that they had the inconvenience of having to turn around, or, in some cases in conversations, they did not want to come around. The school kids had to walk down the street to be able to grab or to catch the school bus. So just knowing that something so small as far as not having the road completely paved was really inconveniencing the community is really what motivated us to go ahead and do what we needed to do to have the road paved.
So we just kept fighting and fighting until we got to the point that we had it paved. We met with commissioners. We got a group together. The whole community got together And we had all the roads paved in Perry Hill.
So working with the association has been really fantastic in that we've actually gotten to meet and know most of our neighbors that are really active in the community. And just seeing everyone come together and take on the different tasks as far as making sure that we did what we needed to do has been really amazing to see how everyone come together to accomplish the feat of getting the road paved.
But now before you see we have a nicely two-lane maintained road that is used quite often.
By the road being paved, it is safer. We don't have to go the long way around, especially when it's ice on the road. We just take the shortcut to go out to 70. And the road helps a lot. We had to really maneuver to get home once we came in off of 70. So yeah, we feel good about the road. There are other things we want done and we're gonna try to get done, but we at least got the road paved.
So I think a lot of the video can be summarized in what Ms. Kenneth once said at the end, is that that there's a lot that communities want and a lot that communities feel they need. And one goal of our team is to work in conjunction with that and hoping to continue to check in and create long-lasting relationships that can highlight these efforts and work to provide long-term solutions. And so from here, I'm going to pass it to my team member, Jared, to discuss some of design thinking for SNAP-Ed programs.
Thank you, Emil. So Design Thinking for SNAP-Ed is a consultancy to drive the reach and impact of SNAP-Ed programming among people who care for young children and receive SNAP benefits by developing interventions and/or experiences to engage them in places they frequently visit, like the grocery store, doctor's office, and their children's early childhood education centers. Design thinking is an approach to problem solving that centers the user's needs and desires and prioritizes feasibility and viability. One key method of design thinking is co-creation. Co-creation is when you assemble users and other important stakeholders to work through design and implementation together to continue building out a potential solution or idea to the user's defined problem. So the picture shown above is one example of how our team used co-creation. In the picture, you can find our research team, primary users or caregivers, and key stakeholders all sharing and collaborating in this virtual space. You can go to the next slide. So like other participatory research methods, design thinking is still inherently susceptible to white supremacy norms and values, particularly paternalism. The quote from We All Count shown above captures the essence of how white supremacy norms may appear in design thinking work as well, as it states, the way you go about gathering, processing, and reporting data on the people involved in your work matters, as much or more than why you are doing the work or doing your project or what answer you arrive at. If you end up with a good report, but your methods are destructive, extractive, or blatantly biased towards yourself or your organization, no one involved in the process will care about or trust your information. Go to the next slide. So Tema Okun also illustrates how paternalism may show up in our work, such as those holding power, controlling decision-making and defining things such as standards, perfection, or one right way. Those holding power assume they're qualified and entitled to define standards and the one right way, as well as making decisions of those without power. Those holding power often don't think it's important or necessary to understand the viewpoint or experiences of those for whom they are making decisions, often labeling those for whom they are making decisions as unqualified intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And lastly, those without power are marginalized from decision-making processes, as well as a result of having limited access to information about how decisions get made and who makes what decisions. At the same time, they're completely familiar with the decision or with the impact of those decisions on them. So we'd like to share a few of our team processes for noticing when and how paternalism and other white supremacy norms were showing up in this project and how we tried to address them collectively. First, we work to always include those most affected in the brainstorming and decision-making process. We intentionally use design thinking methods such as group brainstorming, dot voting, and card sorts to create shared decision-making and center participants with lived experience throughout the intervention development process. We also named where and how power dynamics are showing up in our work, often and intentionally. For example, facilitators completed individual reflections after each co-creation session, including questions like, what modifications should we make to the sessions to manage existing or emerging power dynamics between stakeholders? The timing of the reflections were important as well. Each reflection was completed immediately after the co-creation sessions, ensuring that any issues and power dynamics were addressed quickly and not forgotten. Lastly, we emphasized making the role of the facilitator and the unique expertise of all people in the co-creation sessions contribute explicit. The combination of shared learning, relationship building, and honoring lived expertise helped to create a fluid and equitable space. Although we integrated these practices into our work, there are always areas where we can improve. One example our team identified was to integrate another level of engagement. For example, having caregivers be present for the internal team meetings and debriefings that discuss findings and how to move forward. So in closing, I'd like to reiterate that the process, especially when using participatory methods, is a product. The people you meet, the relationships you form, and the way you engage have a lasting impact on not only the success of the project, but the success of the future. Thank you for listening, and I'd like to pass to Marla.
Thank you, Jared. Thanks all for staying with us. So happy to have you here. I'm going to share some closing thoughts before we take questions. One of the things we wanted to share is that our team has had a mission and values for a while, but after thinking through these different things we've been sharing with you and thinking more about white supremacy manifestations and how we're trying to combat them, we've decided to revisit our mission and values, and we're working on that right now. So they are on our website, and we'll be debuting new ones soon. It's a team effort to get them updated. Some summary of what our team has shared. One thing that Rachel said at the beginning, and I just want to reiterate, is that this is a continual process. We're constantly learning and making mistakes. Like it says here, we mess up and we try again. And we know that we're not experts in this work. We're practitioners. Also, something that has been shared with me is the 3 A's. So first, we need to become aware. So become aware of white supremacy manifestations and how we perpetuate them. We need to acknowledge that we do perpetuate them, and then we must act. And that's what we're doing now. I think Rachel also mentioned this as well, but Tema Okun's work is just one tool, and there are a number of different tools and practitioners and speakers and thinkers in this topic that we're also using to do this work. And we want to make sure too that we consider that we're using this work to improve, but making sure we don't, weaponize the tool, and that we're all human and thinking about being better and also providing each other with grace. The last couple of things I wanted to share are a few anecdotes to go along with the ones that team members have already shared. One of them is really as you can in research, as we're planning grants and carrying them out, is to strive to include planning time so we can combat the sense of urgency that often happens. And also seeing if along the way there can be time for reflection as well. Often also trying to see about questioning urgency. Like, do we really need to get something done in that period of time? Is there some way we can think through other ways and step back a little bit? And the other thing, it's something within academia and research we're scared of, but sometimes we fail, and failure is learning too. And we need to be mindful of that, because we can learn and we can change and we can try again. And that's what our team is striving to do with all the projects that we've shared. We're going to move into question time. So, but here's this last slide. Thanks, Rachel. We have various social media. You can find it here, Twitter, etc. If there are questions, we can take them now if folks want to put questions in the chat. The last slide does provide some resources and links, and we will make sure this recording and these slides are provided so that y'all can find them easily. We can maybe stop share and see if folks have questions.
Is it okay if we say them out loud too, just because it might be easier to share like through words?
Go for it. If you have a question, please.
So one of the things that I notice is a lot of people in North Carolina tend to be kind of like very, this is to say, they're very like wary of the UNC like brand. So every time UNC engages in like research or takes on an initiative with other communities, there's like a lot of like, oh my God, it's UNC, like UNC is like, or like just for example, like they're super liberal or they have this thing or like they're this big institution, and there's like a lot of mistrust between UNC and the community. So what experiences have you guys had with that? Especially because like for some other communities, for example, they might find UNC to like clash with like their own values from the past. And this could be like on both sides, like both different ideologies, like, oh, UNC is a very racist institution. Oh, UNC is a very liberal institution. What's your experience with that?
Thanks for that question, Uma. Reverend Kearney.
Thanks for asking that question. Molly and I have been doing research, boy, it has to be about 10 years at least. And we were challenged with that with our initial project, where we partnered with UNC to support a community garden at our church. And within our church and the community, there was such a distrust and concern with partnering with academia and founders because of something that had happened with another project not involving us. But also community members felt like we didn't have much to offer. The university had much more to offer to the partnership. So we were very intentional. We allowed our church members and community to list all that they brought to the partnership on one side of a page, and the university, everything the university brought. And we found out we brought more assets and goodwill to the partnership. So I believe my work with the university as sort of a liaison between the communities we serve and the university helps to ease that tension, because we had to create a space where people felt comfortable and a language that was understood by all partners, because we were basically saying the same thing, just using different language. And also we had to adapt to the different time frames. Community moved a little slower than the research project in the funding cycle. So these are the things that we saw that were really perpetuating white supremacy, and we try and provide antidotes for that.
And may I add to that? I think one other thing is that you have to acknowledge that things have happened. You know, you can't go into a situation, into a community trying to deny what has happened. You may not have, you know, been a part of it, but we know historically, predominantly white institutions have taken advantage of communities of color. And so I think the first thing is to acknowledge that. For me, for my particular project, I grew up in a county that is very much like the ones in which I work. And so I bring that lived experience with me and can connect to the members of that community. And so I think you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. And there are many times where I will take off my UNC hat to show that first and foremost, I'm just Tiki. And I do understand a lot of the things that those community members are going through because I've gone through them myself.
Or thank you.
Thank you, Tiki and Reverend Kearney, for sharing. I think we'll take some questions from the chat. So Alex is asking, what are some best practices for dismantling white supremacy as a supervisor? As a young supervisor to 2 student workers, I try to be mindful of my role in the team while trying to balance needs like flexibility and education that is truly beneficial to the growth and discipline interest of the students.
So I just want to mention that we have another team member on here with us, Claire Sadigzadeh. And Claire, if you want to jump in and help us answer any of these questions, please do. I'll say briefly about this, but I'd love the rest of the team to answer. But, one of the white supremacy manifestations is perfectionism. And one of the antidotes to that is sort of rough draft and allowing people to know that making mistakes is fine. So when we work with our students, trying to let them know that we may work through multiple versions and that's fine. And that it's always a work in progress. So that's part of it.
Can I jump in? So I asked the question, and that's actually one of my bigger concerns is I'm trying to reduce perfectionism. But I think also having a broad, can you please make this, but kind of go how you want, when students are very used to in the classroom, this is the way that you do it, is very off-putting. It's kind of like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, I don't want to do this kind of thing, And I haven't got that reaction from the students yet, but I'm very worried that that's going to happen, of like, he has no direction, he's just asking me to do, whatever here, and it's hard to balance that. But I also realize perfectionism causes a lot of tensions that's just really unnecessary.
Yeah, we have multiple students working on a storytelling projects right now with Reverend Kearney and with Tiki. Emil's one of those students. And Judith's working with them too. And we've really left it open to them to figure out what the community wants in terms of the product and how to get there. And I'm sure that sort of nebulousness is a little challenging for them, but it also allows so much creativity. And that's what we're striving for. But we also work on providing support too and encouragement. If that helps, Alex, at all.
I think I would just add to that, as part of this team, I felt like one benefit has been a solid foundation from which I can build that creativity. So understanding the fundamentals of the project and the reason why we're doing it. And I think that understanding allows me to then take on the creativity that Molly was talking about.
Thanks, team. So we have another question in the chat from Catherine. She says, thank you for a great presentation and introduction to Tema Okun. Can we talk about how to balance the urgency demanded by our funding agencies, like a quick turnaround on grant proposals, versus taking the time that is needed to nurture mutual relationships with community partners?
I'll jump in. I think that was the significance of our field trips. Even before grant, or we go out and really get to interact with our communities, get to learn our communities, see what their priorities are, and even connect them with other resources that maybe not funded through our funds, but help them build a network and build capacity to access resources while we try and change the funding systems. But what we do immediately to support our communities to be more capable of being part of the solution.
Yeah, Reverend Kearney alluded to this, but he and I started with a fairly small grant through NC Tracks, which really helped us to build our partnerships that we now are building all of our work on. So that funding and some other funding allowed us to continue our partnerships while also writing other grants. I'm not going to say it's easy though. And often showing up takes time, and it means like driving out to communities, being there on the weekends or in the evening. But once we have more of that trust, we can talk with each other about the projects and have more like thoughtfulness and time to actually write the proposals. And luckily, we've been able to maintain a certain level of funding so that we're able to continue with some of our partners for 6, 7, 10 years.
And I think that it all goes back also to, the value placed on quantitative versus qualitative projects, and where there is sometimes that need to provide the numbers to a funder rather than the process. So it really depends on the funder what you're able to do.
And I would just also like to add that being transparent with your communities and telling them how difficult and the process for the difficulty that you're having with the funding mechanism, with the bureaucracy that's behind that, that's also very helpful, because you're letting them know that, you know, here, I'm being transparent about the issues and the difficulty that we have with funding mechanisms and all the bureaucracy behind that.
I mean, in terms of learning from our failures, we have had some community partners who have divorced us because, well, we made some missteps, or the funding didn't allow us to do what some of our community partners had been used to doing with other types of funding. So we learn, but I want to acknowledge that it's not always perfect.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do wish there was a way to influence funders more. I feel like the turnaround times have actually gotten shorter as opposed to longer. And I feel like that creates that pressure and that urgency. And I do wish there was a way to push back with the funders and kind of explain to them. I don't know, I keep hoping that this emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion will have the effect of saying we need time to develop these, you know, partnerships and to incorporate diverse voices, and you can't do that in 6 weeks. And you know, so I was almost not thinking so much from us to the communities. I was thinking from us up to the funders, you know, like what are some levers that we can, or maybe it's bringing our community partners in with us and being kind of a unified voice and saying, you know, we can't operate like this. I've always wondered why federal organizations, you know, particularly NIH and CDC and all that, you know, is it their budgets? What is it about the way they operate that creates these intense, you know, deadlines? And sometimes it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money that could do great stuff in our communities. And so, you know, on one hand, you're like, oh, this would be an amazing opportunity. And on the other hand, it's like, I'm going to cause a lot of stress by asking people, you know, to do things in this shorter time frame. So.
Thanks for that, Catherine. Yes. Just say I agree.
I think that sense of urgency that we're talking about with the funders can also kind of tip its hat towards power hoarding. Because when you know, have that type of urgency, then you aren't able to share the power the way that you would when you're able to carefully think about it. And so trying to bring your partners along with you and to build them into your projects, I think is really important, because it helps, I think, sort of demonstrate the process needed to get to where the funders are wanting you to get to within 60 seconds.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
How do you think that UNC could like face its own history, like as we like move forward? I think you mentioned something about like being more transparent, recognizing what we've done wrong. So just to like cap off, maybe how do you think you yourselves and other organizations on campus can fully reckon with our history? Because there is like this concept of like cancel culture and things going on right now too. But how can we both face our history and move forward too, if that makes sense?
It totally makes sense. Team?
I think I would start by doing exactly, you know, what I said in the beginning, acknowledge that things have happened. We are representatives of the university. We may not have had a hand in what happened, but we do know it existed. And so I think first and foremost, acknowledging that, and then you can begin to heal. When you take ownership of things that have happened, it's only then that you can really begin to heal. So I think for me, that's the first thing.
Thanks, Tiki. Jared, did you have some thoughts?
Yes, but they're not complete yet. Come back to me.
team, anyone have anything before we go back to Jared?
I was just thinking about the broader picture of systemic racism that manifests itself in just about all the institutions, and UNC being one of those. But I can be the face of the university in my anti-racist approach, because universities and institutions are made up of individuals. And so how we become the face of what we say we want to be while we try and change the structure. But awareness that systemic racism is real, and that now to be able to have tools to really address it in our small but significant ways, to make our research more equitable and more fair, and to educate our community about systems that they are trying to navigate that they don't understand themselves and find themselves perpetuating. So I believe us using our positions to be allies and intervention for our communities, but pushing the envelope for these systems that we work within and within.
Maybe Reverend Kearney, if I can add a little bit to what you said too, we're definitely individuals under this institution. And like Reverend Kearney said, it's important that as individuals, we acknowledge it and then have patience, I think is incredibly important, because there's so many individuals under this institution and everyone has a different will, and every team and every individual is in a different point in their kind of learning experience. So having patience with communities, having grace, being able to explain and justify our position and where we're coming from, and just being transparent as individuals over and 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 over again.
Yes, I agree. You don't want to fall into that manifestation of sense of urgency again, so it's all a process.
And the one thing I would add too is being willing to take feedback on that process, because despite having done it right or wrong in the past, this, either could happen as you move forward and continue your work. So being willing to hold oneself and one's team accountable, but also incorporating feedback that has been received from projects or from outreach or relationships made with community members and organizations.
Thanks, everyone. We are over time, but thank you so much for the excellent questions. We will make sure that this recording is posted so that everyone has access to it and can share it with others. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.